Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show with your host, Phil Tarrant.
Hi everyone, how are you going? Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. And we're going to mix it up a little bit. I've got a couple of guests in the studio and you're probably familiar with both of them. We've done a podcast together some time ago now. It's probably sort of 3 or 4 months ago, and it was just running up to the federal election, running off the back of the Royal Commission, and we had a good chin wag about the world of mortgage broking, how it's shaping and influencing mortgages moving forward and what that means for property investors. So I thought we'd reconvene, get back into it. Alex Whitlock, he sometimes stands in as a host of the Smart Property Investment Show. Alexander, how are you going? You well?
Poor second cousin to Philip Tarrant.
Yes, you know, it's hard to emulate brilliance. But that said, we do have podcast royalty in the studio.
Oh, God.
Ben Kingsley, he's the director of Empower Wealth, which is it's advisory business for property, right? Is that the best way to package it up?
Property advisory.
Special advisory.
Yep. Just before we get into it, Ben, I was just, when we caught up earlier, just your reasons for setting up Empower Wealth really resonated. You just want to run through those, your philosophy about why you set that business up, and it gives a bit of explanation as to, why you're doing what you're doing and moving into your podcasting.
Yeah, sure. So, look, the idea behind Empower Wealth is all about changing people's lives and creating financial peace. And when on my own personal journey, I grew up in a household where we're middle class. We did the trips to Disneyland. We did all of these things, right? But in our household, my parents used to debate money. I'll probably argue, really, is probably the right word. Dad was a saver, wanted to basically retire early and do that. Mum wanted to make sure we were all okay and everything was going all right. So, but it's just the fact that, money controlled the household really didn't resonate well with me. And I always had a mental note to myself, in my teen years, that I thought, I want to be in a position where personally I'm financially free and I can work out the mindset around controlling money rather than it controlling me. And that's obviously then led you on the journey in terms of investing in shares and looking at different types of options around it. And so, back in my late teens and early 20s, I was doing all of the seminars and workshops and all the different things. So I heard from all the big spruikers of the day, and also went along to the ASX and listened to some of their training programs. And I invested in shares from pretty much the age of, I reckon my first lot of shares I bought was probably when I was about 17. And then I started, dabbling in shares. I was an avid saver. I'd save a lot. I'd always work part-time and do all that type of stuff. And what I learned from that was my tolerance in the share market was I couldn't control my emotions with the fact that the shares were moving left, right and centre all day. And so I just knew that share market investing for me was just something I couldn't control. And I'm one of these people who like to be in control. So when I found property investing, and then I found smart leverage into property investing in terms of some of the takeaways I learnt, and I read everything that I could get my hands on, ultimately I then started to seek advice. And what was fascinating about seeking advice was that I had these spruikers to one end, which I always knew I was never going to touch. But then some of the professional advice was contradictory. I always used to, so I'd go and see one lot of accountants and I'd go and ask another, and then, no, that's not what you're doing. No. So for me, the vision of Empower Wealth was a one-stop shop, a place where you could do money management and get in control of your finances, and then work right through into the execution of property investment. So we were taking people on a transformational journey to create financial peace for those households.
Just before we get into property, so let's just dwell on money. And I find it fascinating the further through life that I go, because I go back to my upbringing, and I was from one of those households. I don't know about you, Phil, but I sort of grew up in a household where money wasn't discussed. My old man, I didn't know what he earned.
We didn't have any, so
yeah. I didn't know what he earned.
Not having any money, yeah.
But usually, so the households, and this is a passion project of mine, and it's moved into obviously the second book that we wrote around a money management system.
You're not here for plugging your book,
no,
mate.
I'm not. I'm not here for plug. I didn't even mention the name of it, Phil.
It's available at all good retailers.
What's it called, by the way?
Make Money Simple Again.
That's right. That's good.
So I did get a plug in. Thanks, Phil.
No, that's right. I got a copy of it. So I do read your books.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, I do.
Did you get anything out of it?
I did. That's probably what I use every day on the podcast. These are everyone else's ideas I normally sprouting,
but it's sort of people are poor money managers. I mean, the very, very first podcast we did was about people being dumb with money, right? And if you can trap surplus, then you've got a choice in life in terms of how you put that money to work. So, coming back to your point around discussions around households, talking about money, it's so important, from talking with people like Paul Clitheroe and looking at sort of all of the education that's going into financial literacy. It's critical. All right, because we need to change behaviour around money, and it usually does start in the home. So if you're having open and transparent conversations around money, then usually you'll know whether you're a good money manager or a bad money manager, and you can improve on that, and you can change your habits around money management.
Money was a mystery in our house. It was a big dark secret from myself and from my brother growing up. It was something that grown-ups got involved with. It was something serious and something not to be discussed. It's a black hole in terms of my sort of impression and understanding, and what that meant for me, when I was younger and going into my sort of teenage years, and then really, through sort of going to university, it was my relationship with money was very transactional. When I got money, I spent it. I didn't really have any kind of concept of how to use money for the long term and not end up becoming a slave to money in the long term. And I only really got to grips with my finances when I was 28 years old, and I actually started investing in property. And I didn't really have anyone to mentor me, but I was just forced or maybe encouraged to sort of understand myself something a little bit more long term, not just about making money for the future, but all everything that goes with it. Saving. I'd save some money for a deposit. I'd actually bought off the plan. So, look, you can have your opinions about off the plan purchases. It worked very well for me for two reasons. One, the actual investment was reasonably successful. But the main thing was, Ben, I'd saved up a deposit, which got me my, at the time, 10%. And I had to save another 10% for completion in 18 months' time. So that really helped sort of start to develop my sort of financial muscles, if you will.
Yeah,
So, I learned late in life, about money. Phil, you grew up different. We all grown up in different environments. What was the attitude to money in your household?
Well, it's only in hindsight that you appreciate just how tight things can be at times, and how parents will buttress kids against the challenges in life. And I think that's good parenting, to be honest with you. I sort of chat about a lot on the Smart Money Investment Show. I grew up in Blacktown. It's a very sort of working class upbringing, great upbringing. I didn't think anything different at the point in time. So, I look back at my childhood. It was a great childhood, right? It's only now that, you chat to your old lady and, we had $2 a week spare in the budget. That's, when you think back of the food you used to eat and all this sort of stuff, right? But you just, you know what you know.
That's good budgeting.
It's great budgeting. And this is the key, people living within their means, and a generational shift, and inverted commas, the age of entitlement and the afterpay generation, all this sort of stuff, as in, give it to me now and I'll work out what I'm going to do, or I'll deal with those problems in the future. And generations have changed. Attitudes to money have changed. And you chat about this a lot, Ben.
Oh, I do, because, we're the second country in the world with household debt levels, right? The second highest country with household debt levels. So our grandparents used to be able to manage money pretty well. And the reason for that is because it basically, once it ran out,
that was
gone. Right.
Yeah.
There wasn't a bit of plastic that you could tap and go, or credit, personal credit cards, all those type of things. It just did not exist. So ultimately the jar system was a very successful one, where the money for the mortgage would go in the mortgage jar, the living and lifestyle jar, basically, and then, if there was anything left over, it would go into the mortgage, but also there was a buffer or an emergency account, right? So bills and those types of things. So groceries, it was organised, and households budgeted better. The mindset shift that's occurred probably in the last 20 or 30 years as we've become digitalised, and effectively money is invisible. It's all, basically virtual money, is that people think that the money on the card is theirs.
Yeah.
It is not their money.
But those basic budgeting concepts still exist today as they did 2 generations ago. It's a bit more metaphorical now because you do it in silos. It might be a mental silo or a transactional account silo. But, I don't think there's enough financial education around.
But this goes back to, and I think, as we just sort of touched on, I think finance, starts at home. And I think, again, just back to my sort of experience, money was pretty frightening and just a mystery to me. And I think that you have an opportunity with your kids to be transparent. And I think you kind of bring sort of money down to a sort of a fairly base level, if you do, or grounded level, if you talk about the realities of balancing your household budget. I think to your point, Phil, you don't want to lay stress on your kids when money's tight. You got to, you got a responsibility as adults and as parents to buffer your kids from any financial hardships. But you've also got an opportunity to educate your kids.
Financial education starts at home, and I think a lot of people think it's someone else's responsibility to teach their kids about money. Now, what happens is that you find people later on in life using poor financial management as an excuse for all the ills of the world, whether it's, challenges with finance can be a key driver of challenges with mental health and anxiety. These are key things. So, it's probably worthwhile doing a bigger focus on. I think sort of smartpropertyinvestment.com.au, maybe some tips and tools to help people educate their kids at home around finance so they can be better property investors in the future. But
and you know what? If you haven't had sort of good sort of exposure for one reason or another through the sort of the family home in terms of sort of how your parents have talked about money, hey, there's a lot of things that we can share about the realities of how to use money, how to understand money. And I'm like I say, I grew up in an environment where my parents didn't talk about it. I share everything with my children. Myself and Phil have got a substantial property portfolio, circa, $7.5 million now. It's, to me, if somebody told me when I was 19 years old I'd have any part of that, I'd have fallen over. It's very normal to me now, and I want to be normal with my kids.
I'll give you 3 tips, the listeners 3 tips in terms of, and it's probably good for the adults as well, but consequences, trade-offs, and delayed gratification. So if you can teach your household and the kids inside that household that this is the consequence of this decision, and ultimately we don't have unlimited money, so there are going to be trade-offs. So if you understand consequences and trade-offs, then ultimately you'll start to then focus on the concept of delayed gratification. Yeah. The reason why 90% of the population fail with money management all comes back to this idea that because they can't build the habits because they can't see the incremental improvement straight away.
Yep.
Because delayed gratification or saving a deposit for a home or all of those things take a long time, the dial doesn't move quick enough for them. So mentally, they just give up and they go back to bad habits.
And it's almost like with the dieting thing where you're trying to lose weight, but it's just, you think, you can't envisage yourself shedding that sort of 25% of your body weight. So the little incremental steps to cut down, it's tough, and there's very good reason. And you've got all these, it's much, there's good analogies. You've got supermarkets packed with garbage these days. Mm-hmm. It's hard to walk around a supermarket without buying shit, to be quite frank. And I think in terms of finance, it's very, very similar. You're surrounded by incentives to spend, to waste. You're followed around the media by adverts for shit that you've looked at on whatever. Mm-hmm. You've got, sort of opportunities to take out credit cards. And I think that psychologically, for people looking to start getting ahead, it's just hard. And they don't, a dollar going into the jar, so to speak, becomes seemingly so insignificant. But the thing is, Ben, once that dollar goes in the jar, you just strengthen your financial muscles just that little bit. And then the next time you've got the incentive and the motivation to put $2 in the jar, and you start to build up savings, which eventuate into a deposit.
And in the digital environment, that's why we created the Money Smart system, right? So it works on the virtual jar theory, but effectively it allocates the money that you said you were going to spend, which is your 7-day float, your living and lifestyle. But the other money's trapped in your offset or in your high interest saving account if you're saving for deposit. Now, in terms of how you can, one of the best tips I can give you in terms of how you can change habits or how you can maintain a habit is a measurement. So you need to have a measurement piece in there. So whether we go for a run, we know how many steps we've done. So the gamification is helpful for creating good habits or maintaining habits, right? So for us, the measurement is the monthly checkup, right? Or the monthly check-in. So once you've set up your money, you then know, look, that money, the weekly allowance, that's the jar that I said I was going to spend. So I get the groceries, and then whatever I've got left, I know I was going to spend that on the things that I said. Whatever's left over is basically money that's going to sit in the offset and save you. Now, you're going to have ad hoc transactions. So it's those irregular ones, that's what you provision for. So when you do have, say, a holiday spend, then you track that. But you don't have to track all your money. Everyone thinks that it's hard work and there's apps out there that potentially track everything. You don't have to track everything. But what you do need to do, and this is where budgets always fail, is that people don't check in on it. They just have a list of things that they said they were going to spend and roughly what should be hitting at the end of each one. It is not a rules-based system, and that's why most budgeting fails.
And it's all about accountability and responsibility. These things are only as good as the effort you put into it. When we come back from our break, I want to get into the last time that we all caught up and how the world has changed back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone. Here with Ben Kingsley, Director of Empower Wealth and also co-host of the Property Couch, and Alex Whitlock, the better half of the Smart Property Investment Portfolio. Now, last time we all got together, it was very different political economic climate running off the back of the Royal Commission. Some of the findings that were handed down potentially could have decimated the mortgage broking market, and we had a really good and robust conversation around the role of the broker, and we're running up to the federal election. Now, some people say that you two gentlemen single-handedly helped keep the mortgage broking industry alive and delivering value to customers, and some say that you, Ben, helped shape the outcome of the election with some of your information and dispelling some of the nonsense around negative gearing. So that's the last time we caught up.
Very flattering, Phil, but I'm not going to accept that as the reason why.
But it's
Labor
about
lost.
good information went into the market at the right time to help inform and educate people.
It's about accurate information.
Yeah.
There was, you know, this is one of the things certainly in and around property that has always bothered me, and one of the reasons why we set up SPI is that you get these either deliberate or just negligent inaccuracies that suddenly get held up and get spouted. And what you did, Ben, is basically go, hang on a second, I'm going to look at this properly, and you unearth a huge flaw.
The Treasurer called you out directly, didn't he? He said, some quote around, some mortgage broker has said this around some numbers that you run.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the mortgage broker in Melbourne, I think he referred to it at the press club. That was Chris Bowen as the Shadow Treasurer at the time. Look,
Shadow Treasurer, yeah.
He wasn't the Treasurer.
He wasn't Treasurer.
The reality was that Treasury, we had identified a big flaw in Treasury's modelling, a big flaw in the Grattan Institute's modelling, and they were basing policy off these fictitious data points. And so we obviously, collected those data points from industry and set the record straight. We got some great help from Fin Review in terms of, it was a big story. It meant that effectively that the revenue that they were looking to get through the negative gearing changes that they proposed were not going to materialise at all. And so it was a big rethink. And so it is worrying when the sort of governments of the day and the regulators of the day don't have the right data.
Yeah.
And then they make assumptions based on the data that they do have, and that's fair enough. If they believe that the data is coming from the right sources and they've got the right data, and they could see a model, but we always knew that model was going to be wrong. And in this particular case, it was just the fact that they assumed that as much as 95% of all negative geared properties was the existing property, when in fact it was far less than that. It was almost sort of 45-50% of all property being bought for investment was new property and not existing. So, that meant that there was real stimulus in the economy. There was a real supply move in terms of people buying, like you did, Alex, off the plan or house and land packages. And so that was well documented, and, that blew up.
So where we are today is a very different environment. We have continuity in government. We do have a new Prime Minister, but it's the same team is sitting in the halls of power in Canberra. You've got a larger confidence from Australians in general about the state of the market, state of the economy, how we're progressing as a nation, and the leadership to support that. Property investors now know there was a lot of unknowns way back when we last got together. Now there is some knowns, as in negative gearing, all okay, capital gains tax concessions, all okay. So investors now, Ben, can move ahead with confidence that they didn't have beforehand. Now, you deal with investors every single day, and I understand we were having a chat the other day that you've hit a milestone in your business, that you've just marked your 1,000th property
purchase.
That you've supported investors to get into. What's the word on the street? How are investors feeling right now? Are they okay? Are they buoyed by this as much stability as we can have, and property markets which have been fluctuating seem to be going in the right direction?
Yeah,
now?
Look, it's a great question, Phil. I think we will never go back to the heady time of property investing that we saw when money was cheap and lending, assessment rates where you're able to buy multiple properties really quickly. I think the government will keep an eye, and the regulators will definitely keep an eye on that, because what we don't want is speculation in the property market.
No.
That is dangerous. It's unsustainable. And I think there's more that they can do in terms of taking speculation out of the market. So what we are seeing is new entrants coming into the market. I still think it's challenging, given the APRA guidelines that we have around assessment and borrowing power, that if you're trying to get your fifth or sixth property, you're probably going to be still challenged in today's environment. But in terms of buying 1, 2, 3 or 4 properties over a 20-year period that is going to supplement you in retirement and build that legacy and the family's next generation and so forth can build on, that's still alive. And for me, who's someone who believes, in the whole concept of aspiration, and if it is to be, it's up to me, and I can potentially change my circumstances and create a household that is financially free. I love that about this country, in terms of, still having that opportunity.
Is there more investors in the market now than what there was 6-9 months ago?
Oh, I think there's still probably more first home buyers.
Yeah.
But certainly...
So, sorry, Ben. So do you mean first people buying their own home to go and live in, or people buying their first property?
No,
and
first home buyers.
Okay,
We're at I think it's the highest level in 7 or 8 years for firsties, so first home buyers coming into the market. And so they're at about 19-20%. So they're almost catching up with the investor market levels at the moment. So I still think the competition at the moment is probably between the first home buyer in that sub 750 range and the investor who's still probably looking for a little bit of yield. And then what we are also seeing that the upsizers are now starting to reconsider the more blue chip areas and the more affluent areas across the sort of main eastern seaboard marketplaces. We've still got sporadic behaviour in WA, basically very little behaviour in Darwin, and Adelaide's just keeps on keeping on. It's just there's quite achiever in the background, which with a real mix of different buyers in that market.
What are the best investors? What are the smartest investors doing at the moment in this market?
Well, I think some of them are seeing opportunity whereby if you've got really strong cash flows and strong surplus and good job security, I think some of the more affluent investors are sort of lifting their eyes around that $1 million to $1.5 million, where those properties were probably still priced at 1.8s, 1.9s. You're still probably picking them up at 1.4s, 1.5s, but that's moving pretty quickly. So we do know that the grassroots of the revaluation of property in the States, as reported by CoreLogic and so forth, is really around that higher end. That top 25% quartile has moved quick. So I think that will be soaked up. We're still not seeing the evidence that it's moving quickly in the outer suburbs, but I think a ripple effect will take shape over the course of the next 6 to 12 months.
So we all know property is a game of finance, and the financing environment is getting better for property investors moving forward. So I want to touch on that, but before we do, just cut to a quick break. Back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone, here with Ben Kingsley and Alex Whitlock. Now, you two gentlemen, you're in the game of finance. Ben, you run Empower Wealth. Part of what you do is mortgage financing, and Alex, in another part of your life, you're very engaged within the mortgage broker community via a couple of platforms that you work across mortgage business and advice. Now, you guys have just come back from a study tour somewhere, so you guys invest in your education, understanding other markets. I think you went to Ireland, and their lending environment there is very different than the lending environment
Before
here.
we talk about the lending environment over in Ireland, let me tell you, they are just reaching a point where their housing market is starting to recover. And Phil, it is still 40% below where it was in 2008, 2009, is that correct?
Yeah,
or is it
just
around about that?
40% under.
40% below.
Late 2007,
So if you bought at the peak of the market, you're
bought-
probably hurting a bit.
Yeah, so it's and that, Ben, they're fairly happy with the way things are starting to move there now. There's a degree of confidence. Before we get into the finance side of things, let's just talk about how fortunate we are here, but also how potentially vulnerable we are here. And again, in terms of making property investment decisions, this is why you've got to be really cautious, not blasé. The sun's starting to shine again, the property markets, but be warned that things can turn and things can go wrong. But yeah, it's tough going over there in Ireland.
We spoke about the government's role in shaping property markets here in Australia and what we saw prior to the election. Now, from what I understand in Ireland, maybe you can fill me in on this, is that the government is highly involved in regulating and shaping the property market there.
So as what you're saying in terms of prices are set by availability of credit, right? That's, supply and demand is always going to be the case. So we have a market in the Republic of Ireland, right, which is the property prices are completely controlled by the Reserve Bank of Ireland. Let me explain that. So we went down to the 40% level where it is. Now, they don't want to see the boom and bust is what they saw, because their property market collapsed.
Yeah, it's crippled.
And it was one of the worst recessions that Ireland has ever experienced. I mean, we saw a lot of people, the young people, leave and move to countries like Australia because there was just simply 25% plus unemployment for people under 25 years of age. The economy completely collapsed. So too big to fail. We've just learnt that the property markets are too big to fail. So now we've got a situation where there's only 6 lenders in Ireland. So 6 lending opportunities, and they're all capped by a 3.5 times household income ratio. So borrowing power is exactly the same irrespective of which lender you choose. So there is no open market for credit in that particular space. So the irony is that we've got households where, if you work out the average household income in Dublin, will generate about a €280,000 loan. Yet the median house price in Dublin, because you've obviously, you're taking the middle ground there, is 400,000.
And that's 40% under where it topped out at.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can see how much it ballooned, right? Because, credit was cheap and, everyone thought about this new paradigm of equity paradigm, crazy stuff, right? So we've got a situation now where effectively the government has the complete lever to control prices in that particular market. Now, as someone who believes in open market economies and sort of seeing how things move, I would like to see some reform going on in there and some relaxation going, because here's the backstory of that, right? The consequences of that are these, is now we've got a situation in Ireland where big industry is moving in and they're building what we call build to rent product. And they're getting yields of 8 to 9%.
Massive, yeah.
Now, that's euro yields, right?
Yeah.
So, those companies are rubbing their hands together to say that if the government keeps...
And they're selling it all outside of Ireland to foreign investors.
In many ways, a monopoly, of controlling property.
Yeah. And so you're talking about vacancy rates of less than 1% within a, sort of 20-kilometre radius of Dublin. And, it's attractive as an investment because corporate tax rates in Ireland are 12.5%. Hence, you've got companies like Google and all the big tech companies. That's their European headquarters, right? Because it's also English speaking. So it was buzzing. Like Dublin, you could see it. There was a spring in the step of people. It was an eclectic mix of people. We had a lot of Eastern European and lots of different languages being spoken in that particular market. So I see good things happening in that market, but I also say the consequences of controlling supply is very, very high rental yields. So the same sort of consequences we might have here, we bring it back into the Australian market. We've got problems with off-the-plan construction and qualities and financing of that. So we need to be building around 200,000 new dwellings each year to just meet minimum demand. And we're seeing forecasts coming out of the Housing Association and so forth saying we're going to do about 160 next year. So if we continue this pent-up demand, what's going to happen is yields are going to grow because ultimately the build-to-rent model doesn't work here under the current legislation. So we might see some tweaks in regards to what's going to happen there. But what I'm sort of saying is mum and dad investors are here to help, right? We do want to, whether it's their first investment property or their third investment, they want to come in and basically help out here. But they've got to be buying stuff that they believe is going to give them a return on investment because ultimately there's an opportunity cost of that money. They either invested in here or they go shares or they go other things. So it's really important that the government understands the consequences, both direct and indirect, with those types of levers that they're pulling in terms of their macro-prudential operations.
So it's not that bad to be an Australian property investor versus our friends over in Ireland.
Not if you're an Australian property investor buying an island.
If you can afford it.
So we sit here and complain about how hard it is to get credit and if you can get good mortgage rates in sort of mid-threes these days, right? I did ask
the question, Phil, when I was over there of one of the brokers whether they'll take Australian income to see whether, and so the answer to that is no. So you can't borrow over there, but if you bought the money, and obviously again, European Union country, so ultimately if you bring the cash in and buy that property and house in euro, except for our poor Australian dollar, your yields are very strong. But just remember, they won't last forever.
But it comes back round to how we kind of start the conversation off. If you're an Australian borrower and maybe you're looking to get your first property, maybe you want to buy your first home, maybe you want to buy an investment, if you've got the financial discipline to present yourself with a good clean borrowing, with a good clean financial record, with good, because now the banks can see exactly what you spend and where you spend it. If you just have that discipline as a borrower and you position yourself the right way, yes, property is expensive here, but it's harder for people to borrow if they don't have that kind of positioning. So get your finances in order. The world is your oyster.
And a great tip there, Alex, is what would have normally taken 7 days to get pre-approvals can sometimes take up to 2 to 3 weeks, given the scrutiny that they're going through in terms of that lending assessment. So my advice to anyone who's thinking that they want to potentially invest in property, just put a mindset there that you won't be shopping for at least a month to maybe a month and a half. Because what happens is people go, look, and they go, and they scramble and they go to their broker and the broker's absolutely scrambling. And in some cases, it's out of their control to be able to get them the confidence and the pre-approval that they can bid at an auction or whatever. So that is what we have learned in terms of lead times and processing times have blown out under this new regime of regulation.
It's a good way to close out, and they're really good insights. It's about being prepared. If you want to capitalise on the market, whatever the market is for you, you need to be prepared, and pre-approval is key. So speak to a good broker, right, Ben? Beforehand.
That's right.
And also, I think, just touching on, understand that, that the opportunities are here in Australia. We're very, very, very fortunate, but it requires responsibility for you, the borrower, you, the buyer. I think too often people look outside and complain about environmental circumstances. If you go about things the right way, if you have the right guidance from professionals around you, but also really the right mindset yourself, it's all there to be done.
Gentlemen, that was 6 months on since we last got together. Everyone's smiling this time. Beforehand, when we got together, everyone's frowning, a sort of little bit of collar sort of, hey, here we go, this is going to be good. So what a great time to be in property and a great time to be a property investor. Really appreciate you coming in, Ben, have a chat with us. Always enjoy it. And if you're not, there's only 2 podcasts you need to know about if you're a property investor. Smart Property Investment Show, and we do enjoy delivering this podcast. And it's very different to what Ben does on the Property Couch. So Ben and Bryce, so I highly recommend go and tune into those guys, and you'll get a different flavour, but pretty much you can cover all ground on those 2 things. So thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Phil.
Appreciate you sharing this. And so Alex, thanks again, mate. It's always good to have you on the show. Remember to check out smartpropertyinvestment.com.au, and please keep those reviews coming on iTunes. The guys really get a kick out of it. 5 stars if that's what you're up to, but we love the feedback. We're always looking to improve and shape the show. So leave us a note there, or you can contact the team here, editor at smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. If you're a social person, just search Smart Property HQ. You can check out what's going on. We'll be back again next time. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.